The Philadelphia Eagles offense has arguably been one of the worst offenses in the entire NFL during the first quarter of football games. Essentially, what I'm speaking to, guys, is why is this Philadelphia Eagles offense stuck in the mud during the first, second, and sometimes the third possession of football games? Why are we the only team in the NFL thus far through the first two possession of football games who has not crossed the pay dirt into the end zone for a touchdown? That's what I kind of want to deep dive into today by looking at the Cleveland Browns game and just kind of deciphering what was put out there in terms of the game plan. And let's be honest about this situation, guys, before we dive too deep here. Honestly, the situation here is we have dealt with some injuries. We've had inconsistency along the offensive line because of guys kind of coming in and out of the game. The right side of our offensive line in particular kind of dealt with it. Now we're dealing with a little bit on the left side with Mulata going down. And then we also, we've had some guys that went down from the offensive skill set positions, right? Dallas Goedert's now missing games. A.J. Brown missed games. Devontae Smith missed games. Like, there's definitely been some mitigating circumstances that, to some extent, explain some of this, that there have been some challenges from a personnel standpoint due to the early season struggles of offenses just generally getting into a rhythm and kind of going through those quasi preseason type struggles, to the fact that we've had injuries and it's going to limit to what we can do offensively. And it takes a lot to kind of adjust and game plan to that to kind of win. There's no doubt those things hold true. I'm not avoiding those situations. Those do count. But I want to talk about what's actually on the tape and what we can speak definitively about in terms of the tape. And the first thing I want to say is when I went back to study the Philadelphia Eagles tape, I went through and I was looking at the benchmarks of like what they were trying to do from a game plan, situation here. Like if I was part of the coaching staff and I'm watching this tape, like what would I break down the way that the Philadelphia Eagles tried to attack the Cleveland Browns? And the first thing I'm going to tell you right off the jump is holy 12-man personnel. I know you probably heard it said at this point, now that we're halfway through the week, that, or really towards the end of the week, that the Philadelphia Eagles played a lot of 12-man personnel. Yeah, let me put this into perspective for you guys, okay? 18 out of the first 20 plays were out of 12-man personnel, and over the first three possessions in general, because we really didn't fall into a lot of, we didn't really fall into 11-man personnel almost until the end of the third possession, 19 out of 23. So the first three possessions of the football game, 19 out of 23 plays essentially fell within 12-man personnel, meaning we were really only in 11-man personnel for 4 plays in the first 3 possessions of that game, which is a little surprising when you add to the fact, or you add up and you really talk about Dallas Goedert himself missing snaps, right? Dallas Goedert went out after the first possession of this game. So, that was a little surprising to see, but they did do some pretty creative things out of that, although it did not result in pay dirt being reached. And I think there's a lot of discussion to have here about why that's not occurring. The first thing to talk about are why are we not crossing the pay dirt? And we got to limit turnovers, guys. We have 3 turnovers on the season in terms of first 2 possessions of the football game. I didn't even filter by the first 3. I just did by the first 2 because that's the only thing I can guarantee in terms of the first quarter and also game planning. And let me elaborate upon that for a second about game planning and what I mean by that. So your game plan is not always sequential. When I say sequential, what I mean is, guys, it's not like I can take the first 15, first 20, first 12 plays, however it plays a script basically for that game. It's not like you can just say sequentially the first 12 to 20 plays are absolutely the game plan, right? There's going to be some situational stuff that falls in there. You'll have your third down packages. You'll have your short yardage package stuff. There'll be some things that fall in, you get a false start penalty, you over, snap the ball over the quarterback's head and put yourself into a pretty dangerous situation in terms of the down and distance. Now, that's going to knock you out of what you kind of constructed in terms of the game prep week, in terms of putting together your game plan. It's not always as easy as just saying your first 12, 15, 20 plays. That's why when I actually studied this, guys, I moved it over the first 3 possessions just to give some, some ability to really assess it. And it's over 23 plays, which we ran 62 on the entire game. So basically 23 plays was roughly 37% of all the plays. All right. So looking at 37% of the offense for the first 3 possessions, what was the way that we tried to attack the Cleveland Browns? The first thing I will say right from the jump is there were some very noticeable trends here to when we were static versus kind of when we were a little bit more dynamic in terms of like how we facilitated the offense. And I'll define what I mean by static and dynamic, guys, because I know people say those things but never really provide contextual evidence for what they're saying. When I am personally speaking about static, it does not mean uncreative. It does not mean that it's inherently bad. That's not what I'm saying when I say static. When I say static, another word for static would just be the baseline. When we think of the Philadelphia Eagles offense, what do we think about the baseline in terms of 21, 22, and 23 season? Like, what would be the baseline? The baseline would be what? 2x2 sets where there's no motion. So when I say static, I'm talking about that baseline of 2x2, no motion. Why did the Eagles do that? There were a couple things I picked up on really quickly from this game that stood out to me. Number one, when they were static, they were normally trying to attack basically down the essentially go routes and fly routes and things like that. They were trying to attack vertically. That was very obvious there. Reason why you do that, right? Why do you go 2x2 and try to attack vertically? And I know a lot of people saying that's a low percentage play. Like, why are they doing that? Style makes fights, guys. Style makes fights. Let's keep that in mind. Jim Schwartz plays a lot of cover 1 and cover 3, middle of the field, close, single high, safety. So how do you attack that type of defense? Outside the numbers normally, guys, is how you attack that defense. Now, I'm not saying that you can attack it across the middle of the field. You can, especially at the third level. You can definitely run like some 8-route stuff, those skinny post. You can do things across the middle of the field like your deep ends, your digs, your over routes, along with those, post routes and things like that. Scissors concepts where you're basically trying to tie up that safety and make him commit to playing one way and you throw the ball the other way, essentially. So you can attack it at the third level, to be honest about it, but a lot of the rhythm plays, okay, what we call tempoing the offense, tempoing it, trying to really facilitate and move quickly. When you're trying to do that, it's a little harder to hit inside the 10-yard mark when you're playing like cover 3 or cover 1 because you're going to have a lot more bodies in between the hashes within 10 yards, right? What's a big difference between like cover 3 and cover 4, right? 2 high versus single high, middle of the field open versus middle of the field closed, but also, when you're looking at quarters, you have 3 underneath defenders. When you're looking at cover 3, you have at least 4 underneath defenders. Less space for underneath defenders to cover. You get what I'm saying, guys? Like, styles do make the fights, and that's why they were trying to attack vertically and outside the numbers. I have no problem with them trying to do that. I have problems when it doesn't make sense. Like when you got a team playing cover 2 or quarters concept, or they're playing something like a cover 6 where they got a quarter, half, right? I mean, you can attack the half side of the field. It makes sense if you've got leverage on the safety, but you don't want to be caught up in that situation like last season to where we were in Seattle. We misread the coverage. We misread the leverage play by the safety, and Julian Love picked off Jalen Hurts to close that game out because we took a shot on an audible play that Jalen did. And we saw in this game that's been some of the comments here is that a couple of the vertical shots, one was down the seam on the 3rd and 1 where Barkley missed the block and Jalen got sacked. That was after he ran out of bounds early on that play, by the way, the play before that. The other one was late in the game on a 3rd down to where Jalen converted. So where he pushed the tempo a little bit, not really pushed the tempo, but, he basically audibled at the line of scrimmage, audibled to that go route or that fly route, and then hit it, essentially. It's complex when you talk about this, but it's very obvious when they were static, they were pushing the ball vertically a lot. That was kind of obvious in what was going on from, this tape study here. The second thing I noticed about when they actually were static, what they were doing, RPO-based stuff and option-based reads. Option-based reads meaning there's not really a pass element to it, but Jalen is still reading the edges, so it's between him and the running back who's going to take the ball. RPO means there is a passing element to it. And as a matter of fact, one of the RPO plays that I think it was an RPO play, just given what I see from the tape and the way the receivers are essentially walking down the block. One of the RPO plays that was the over snap from the center, which was on the second possession of the game. It looked like to me that was going to be an RPO read where essentially Jack Stahl would have been a leaker in the pass game, or they probably would have ran inside zone. Which brings me to my next point: static offense, static concepts, 2x2 sets where they're not moving and motioning, inside zone. A lot of inside zone. There was one play where they did run some power or some gap, and they used motion to do it. But I would even say they didn't use motion, my bad. They didn't use motion to do it. But I would say for the most part, when you see like power and gap with the Eagles, there does tend to be the possibility more frequently of motion than RPO stuff. It's not 100% either way. Like there'll be times where they'll motion for RPO inside zone, and there'll be times where they'll not motion. They'll be static when it comes to like obviously running gap or power. I think it just depends upon the fronts that they're getting, they're being shown and things like that. This particular situation, Cleveland played a lot of 5, 6, and 7 man on us in terms of the line of scrimmage. So they were definitely bringing guys down and trying to force the issue with us. it definitely felt like to me that Cleveland's plan was to not let Saquon Barkley beat them. That definitely felt like part of their game plan, like a significant portion of that game plan. Some other things I saw. Speaking of tempoing, and you heard Lane Johnson make the comments about the time clock constraints the Eagles are operating from, right? This whole idea of a clean operation coming from the coaching staff into the quarterback and into the huddle. Well, you saw them get out there really quickly in the first play of the game, and they had Jalen under center. That was one thing I did notice is there were 2 plays where Jalen was under center. It was the first play of the first possession, and then the first play of the third possession, Jalen was under center. And we can see that at least from a game planning standpoint, there seems to be some inherent awareness that giving Saquon Barkley the ability to get downhill and play with a little bit of space and a little bit of momentum approaching the line of scrimmage, they probably should start figuring some of that stuff in from time to time. So there did seem to be some acknowledgement of that by the fact that they did put him under center a couple times. I told you guys that, Kellen Moore put his quarterbacks under center more than we saw from Steichen and a little bit more than what we saw from last season with, Nick and Brian Johnson. But I did warn you that in terms of the passing game concepts, Kellen didn't put his guys under center a whole lot. But underneath the run game concepts, I saw a lot more under center work from Kellen than I saw previously. I will tell you some of this is Nick, absolutely, guys, but it's not 100% just Nick, guys. We've got to keep this stuff in mind. Why don't the Eagles like to run motion on inside zone running plays? Who's your running game coordinator, guys? Jeff Stoutland, TJ Paganetti. Those 2 guys work on the run game coordination. That's also your offensive line coach and your assistant offensive line coach. And TJ Paganetti used to be the assistant running back coach, by the way. So, that's part of it. That's got something to do with this. Those guys, when it comes to setting up the line of scrimmage and the way that they want to down block, the way they want to set up their blocks, they don't want to invite late motioning from the defensive line. That's partially what's going on, guys, is that sometimes in pass protection, right, they want to be able to, with a young quarterback, and I know Jalen's like, well, he's young physically in age, but he's not young in experience anymore, Steve. This is going into basically his 4th year as a starter, his 5th year overall in the league. I get that. But you're talking about a guy who is just now essentially inherited the entirety of a role in terms of the line of scrimmage autonomy and being able to set protections and all those things. So we want to be careful, I think, about the ratio and the rate at which we're inviting this stuff, right? We don't want to invite defenses to shift late on us and change the protections and things like that. As a matter of fact, we can see Jalen makes an audible at the line of scrimmage on that 3rd down play to where he had a chance at Devontae Smith down the seam. And obviously he calls a zone blocking scheme where the line is sliding right. But because he calls that zone blocking scheme where you have a slide right, that means Saquon has to cross the face of the quarterback. You guys remember, I told you this 100 times. I hate those plays. I don't know why they don't just motion the running back over to the opposite side in that situation instead of crossing the face of the quarterback to make that block. Saquon misses the block. It results in a sack. And by the way, if that protection holds up, I am pretty certain that's a touchdown to Devontae Smith down the seam, by the way. It was drawn up well, and Jalen flipped to the right play, in my opinion. There's been a lot of controversy over that play. I got to be honest. You can make the argument that a 3rd and 1, in a game where points were of utmost importance at that particular time in the game, you can an argument to just go pick the ball, just go pick it up. I don't know, man. It was there. What Jalen saw conceptually from the defense, what he saw on the back end in terms of the way that they were, playing their coverage shells and their coverage umbrella, he had it right. Simply put, he had it right. 5 degrees one way, 10 degrees another. I don't really know what else can be said in that situation, guys, to be quite honest. The other concept I noticed that happened quite a bit during this is there was a lot of tush push. Sorry, there's no other way of saying this, guys. The tush push play was in, the quarterback sneak play came up 3 times, which we run that out of 12 personnel. That's probably got a little bit to do with it because, we're in favorable down and distances for 3rd and 4th down in terms of converting for it. That results us to go into that tush push quarterback sneak roll, which we do operate that out of 12 personnel, which obviously when you're looking at 19 out of 23 plays, 3 of those were kind of the result of a tush push. So it does have to be factored in a little bit. And then some of the other things that I noticed on here was just missed opportunities. To begin with, on the first possession, in terms of missed opportunities, A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts not being on the same page, right? A lot of people criticize that play in terms of going with, kind of a vertical concept there on 2nd down, right after, Saquon Barkley had kind of gotten you a halfway decent run on 1st down. Well, to be fair about the situation, man, it's just a miscommunication between the quarterback and wide receiver because it was there. What what's being seen here by the quarterback is that, wow, like the way they're rotating their coverages, they're giving me opportunities one-on-one, and I got space to fit this before the safety gets over there for help on this particular play. So, I mean, missed opportunity there, right, to where I think Jalen was trying to get him to come back shoulder, and I do think Jalen had the right read on the play. I think AJ felt like he was, had stacked him, was about to get by him, and was like, hey, you should have trusted me to be able to get by on the stack and push the ball vertically more. I think AJ was in the wrong personally in that particular play. But, it's going to happen, guys. I mean, you're going to have these little hiccups like that. I mean, that's not really anything to lose sleep about. Just bad timing on the first drive of the game, and it definitely hurts us a little bit in terms of functionality and flow of the game, if you will. The other thing I noticed is on that third down play that that Dallas Goedert got injured on, there was some situation there too to where I was a little like, oh man, like there's an opportunity here. And Rodney McLeod made a really great play on this. It was the third down play on the first possession, but the read was correct. What's going on here is that basically they're trying to high-low that corner. And they do a pretty good job because they break A.J. Brown inside. The corner definitely bites down on that. I believe that's Martin Emerson bites down on that play. And then you've got this small window of opportunity to hit Dallas Goedert for the first down there. Because Goddard's coming on the mid-level, mid-developing route behind that. The problem is that A.J. goes to essentially what we call, hitch. He's hitching here, which means to collect or gather yourself before you throw the ball. It's only a bounce you kind of see from quarterbacks when they're collecting themselves. That hitch causes like the ball to just to be like a tenth of a second too late. And that's just the way this game is played, guys, that like the window of opportunity in NFL is so crazy extreme that tenths of a second will ruin it for you. It's a tenth of a second late on this throw. If that play is developed just a tenth of a second later, or a tenth of a second sooner, you got a completion, you got a first down there, more than likely. I will say that to defend this a little bit, and I know that this was the play that Dallas Goedert hurt his hamstring, and that may have been some of the limiting factors of him completing what I'm about to say. But you got to work back towards the ball a little bit there, Dallas. You got to get back towards the ball a little bit there. Obviously, the hamstring, don't know if that happened, when it happened in the sequence of events there. So it's hard to say. I just know that after that play, he came off the field with a hamstring injury. So hard to say exactly, but obviously you would like your receiver to fight back towards the ball there a little bit, not play so passive and allow the safety to undercut that one, because there was an opportunity to convert that one, to be honest. Next play I'll talk about, guys, is the opportunity that we had during the game to where Saquon Barkley almost breaks one. I believe it was on the second possession of the football game where Saquon runs into Landon Dickerson. It's just ill-fated. It's ill-fated time because that would have been a big, big play. It's just an ill-fated time for that particular situation to occur on. There's a few plays in this game that I would come back to because I think that they were pretty dang effective. It was just misfortune in terms of them not working out. Like, there were opportunities here to absolutely put the ball across the end zone, in my opinion. I definitely think that this was one of those situations to where, I mean, it's the way the game is played, man, where you're always a split second away from it being a big play. And that's part of the thing I will say here is, in conclusion to what I saw on the tape here versus Cleveland, I do expect that the Philadelphia Eagles at some point are going to clearly break this streak. I think we all expect that. I mean, it'd be kind of hard to go all 17 games like that. But when I say break the streak, I don't mean like a one-off thing. I think you're going to see them eventually heat up and this offense is going to get into rhythm together. We got to keep in mind, man, they haven't had a lot of opportunity to play as a full unit together outside of the Green Bay game. Since that Green Bay game, it's been kind of scattered in terms of who's been available offensively. Even going forward now, we're still going to be going without Dallas Goedert. We're still going to be going without, Jordan Mailata for a little while. So even now it's going to be a little scattered, but I still think you're hopeful because, to be fair, whether they play Becton outside at left tackle or whatever, I think when Steen had his opportunity to play in game, I thought Tyler Steen did a really good job. And I got to shout out the big guy coming off the bench being the first one up in terms of, the sixth man off the bench and just how well that they have played. Like, to be honest, our reserves have played quite well offensively. So, like, I will say with their outside receiving threats here, with Saquon still in the game, with Jalen still in the game, like, I do expect that at some point this is going to be broken and then we'll go on a nice little streak here. But consistency from the group of guys that are playing is going to matter, to be quite honest. I think that's part of the hiccups, to be honest, about it. Can they do things offensively to help ease some of this stuff? Sure, they can. Absolutely, they can. But you don't want to overcompensate, guys. You got to be really careful not to overcorrect. Overcorrections can kill you too. So that's kind of like the tough thing that they're in right now is like, ideally, I would say you probably don't want to open up most games to where they're running 5, 6, 7-man boxes, and you keep coming back tight formation, right? If you looked at the ratio of how often they were tight to formation versus spread concepts, like where they were spreading out the defense a little bit more, it was quite heavy in terms of like just inviting them to bring down 5, 6, 7 guys in the box or along the line of scrimmage. Now, when I'm saying a 7-man box, I don't mean just purely a 7-man box. I'm talking about along the line of scrimmage itself. Like they were widening it out into 70, 60, and 50 fronts because of the way that we were playing tight to splits, and that's because we were playing a lot of 12 personnel. I mean, ideally speaking, guys, I think you want to get into your 11 personnel and trust that you can run the ball out of 11 personnel, trust that you can gain advantages in the receiving game out of 11 personnel. And I do think that with Calcaterra having the game that he had, I think that helps. I think, even when you look at the way that we played in terms of some of these role players that came in, Calcaterra having that game. Jack Stoll didn't really register or catch or anything, but I mean, what he was able to do in the run game and be sufficient for what they need him to do in terms of Dallas Goedert going down and him being impactful and important to things. Like that helps you, right? I'll say Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson didn't have a crazy productive day, but those 2 catches he had were pretty clutch, man. You want to get more targets, you want to get more catches, keep earning the trust of the quarterback the way you did in this game. Because I thought those 2 catches were at pretty pivotal moments in the game. Like that's definitely a way to take a step forward in terms of being trusted within the offense in itself. So there were some positive things here, guys. I mean, it wasn't all negative, to be quite honest here. With that said, Cleveland's a good defense. But we are expecting this offense to start facilitating itself and ramping itself up to what we expected, after we saw what happened in week 1. I think we're expecting games where we're on average, we're normally above 24 points of offensive production, right? And there's going to be quite a few games during the course of the season where we're putting up 30. I'm going to back off a little bit on the 7+ point win victories because while we only won this game by 4 points, that's a bit of a lie. I mean, if you look across the way that the flow of the game went, if you look across statistically speaking, and then the fact that if we wanted to win this game by double digits, we could have easily taken this ball down there and punched it in across the goal line and won this game by more than 10 points, to be quite honest. But we chose to play a 4-minute offense and then do clock control. I mean, if we were worried about running the score up, we could have absolutely have done that. That wasn't obviously they just wanted to take the win and get the heck up, out of this game. So I think it's going to get better. I think it has to get better. I do think there are some things the Eagles offense can do and the game plan can do to help facilitate things, right? I think, you talk about never wanting to be too heavy to one side or the other. I mean, they were really, really heavy to not only 12-man personnel, but tight formations in the early portion of, Sunday's game. I mean, that was a little shocking to see on tape because, I mean, they were definitely inviting those lines to come up there. And I think that really created some issues for Saquon Barkley to have, space to operate. I'm curious to see if they don't spread them out a little bit this game, the Giants. I'm curious to see if we don't see a little bit more 11-man than we saw, last week in terms of like early game portion of things, right? Those first 3 possessions or so. I'm curious to see how that kind of plays its way out, guys. All right, y'all. I appreciate y'all so much. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you want to know, guys. Let me know what you want me to go over. I can definitely go over some of the role plays and like what happened, how they facilitated the offense, how they got those conversions. I can go over some of the near misses. Wow. I can go over some of the near misses. I can talk a little bit about like, hey, yeah, I mean, I put this one back. I'd put this one back out there again, man. Like the tape shows you that this worked if you could have blocked it up. This worked if you could have got to the right read pre-snap here. And sometimes it's not a right or wrong read things, guys. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to playing quarterback and it comes to that pre and post snap progressions and reads. There's a lot of gray area for things, and you have to understand why the quarterback makes certain decisions, such as like, hey, man, they're inviting us because they're closing off the middle of the field. They're inviting us to challenge them one-on-one down the field. With, you got to ask yourself, do you believe in A.J. Brown? Do you believe in Devontae Smith? Do you believe those guys can win one-on-one matchups versus cornerbacks? Because they had the opportunity there, and they won some, they lost some, to be quite honest, in this game. To be fair to Cleveland, that's not a bad secondary, guys. And let me tell you, they're missing Grant Delpit. And when Grant Delpit gets back for Cleveland, that's going to be a really hard secondary to throw the ball on, to be quite honest. They can pose a lot of problems for teams. All right, y'all. Peace. I'm out of here.